If you had breakfast this morning, you have already consumed at least one chemical, also found in paint, rocket fuel, or beaver body parts. And I say that with zero exaggeration and full government documentation. What you are about to hear is not a conspiracy theory. It is 111 moments of verified, stone-cold American food history that the industry spent millions making sure you never learned. The US government poisoned its own citizens. A major corporation put cocaine in your great-grandma's soda and called it medicine. And the healthy food in your fridge right now contains the same chemical used to make yoga mats. It gets worse every single second. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what you had for breakfast because after this video, you are never eating it again. 1. The US government once decided the best way to stop Americans from drinking was to literally poison them. During Prohibition, federal officials ordered industrial alcohol to be laced with deadly chemicals, and at least 10,000 Americans died after drinking it. The government knew people were dying and kept doing it anyway. Health officials called it a necessary sacrifice. Americans called it their Tuesday night. Nobody won that argument. 2. There was a time in America when your morning Coca-Cola came with a little something extra called cocaine. The original recipe contained real coca leaf extract, and the company marketed it as a nerve tonic that cured everything from headaches to exhaustion. Doctors recommended it. Mothers gave it to tired husbands. Nobody questioned why everyone felt so incredibly fantastic after drinking it until the early 1900s when someone finally connected those dots. 3. Before refrigeration existed, New York City dairies had a genius solution for milk that had already gone bad. They mixed chalk, plaster of Paris, and cow brains into the liquid to make it look thick and fresh again. Nobody at the dairy lost any sleep over it. Thousands of infants died every year drinking this mixture, and the men selling it kept showing up to work the next morning like everything was completely fine. 4. Upton Sinclair walked into Chicago meatpacking factories in the early 1900s, and what he found was so disturbing it accidentally changed American history. Workers swept rat droppings, dead rats, and whatever else was on the floor directly into the meat grinders without stopping the machines. The rats went in. The meat came out. Nobody wore gloves. Americans read his book, immediately put down their sausages, and the government was forced to pass the Pure Food Act before people burned the whole industry down. 5. For decades in America, cigarette companies convinced the government that cigarettes were technically a food product. This was not a joke. By classifying tobacco as an agricultural food item, cigarette manufacturers qualified for farming subsidies funded by taxpayer money while simultaneously avoiding drug regulation entirely. The government handed them checks with one hand and looked the other way with the other. American taxpayers were essentially paying companies to keep selling them cigarettes and calling it agriculture. 6. Red dye. Number 2 sat inside American food products for over 50 years, coloring cherries, sodas, and candy, while Soviet scientists had already flagged it as a potential carcinogen back in the 1950s. The Soviets sent the warning. America ignored it completely. It took until 1976 for the FDA to finally ban the dye, meaning the United States spent decades taking food safety advice from nobody, while the Cold War enemy had already figured it out first. 7. The USDA allows chicken to be labeled and sold as completely fresh in American grocery stores, even if it was previously frozen at 1 degree Fahrenheit. Not 0 degrees, because that would make it officially frozen. 1 degree above 0 means the label can say fresh in large friendly letters on the front of the package. Some lawyer in Washington sat in a room and decided that 1 single degree of temperature was the difference between fresh and frozen, and that decision is still law today. 8. Every American child who grew up watching Saturday morning cartoons was told that sugary cereal was part of a complete balanced breakfast. That phrase was invented entirely by advertising agencies who had no nutritional scientists involved in the process whatsoever. The FTC actually launched an investigation into whether the claim was misleading. They investigated, held meetings, wrote reports, and then decided not to ban anything. The cereal kept coming with the toy inside, and the balanced breakfast kept appearing on television every single morning. 9. During the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, millions of Americans were going hungry while the government came up with a bold economic solution. They slaughtered 6 million pigs and either buried the bodies or burned them in giant pits to keep pork prices from dropping. The reasoning was that if too much pork existed, prices would collapse and farmers would suffer. Hungry Americans watched the government destroy food to protect market value and were told this was the smart approach to the crisis. 10. Mountain Dew was not invented to be a refreshing soft drink enjoyed by teenagers at birthday parties. It was created in the 1940s specifically as a whiskey chaser, and its name comes directly from Appalachian slang for homemade moonshine whiskey. The original creators were building a mixer for illegal backwoods liquor. Pepsi eventually bought it, removed the whiskey, added more sugar, turned it neon yellow, and sold it to suburban America as a completely normal beverage that children could enjoy with lunch. 11. A preservative called BHA sits inside many American breakfast cereals right now, and the National Toxicology Program has officially classified it as reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen. That is the government's own science division using the government's own words to describe something the government still allows in food. Americans pour milk over it every morning and call it a healthy start to the day, while the agency responsible for food safety reads the report and approves next year's batch anyway. 12. In American pharmacies throughout the late 1800s and well into 1930, mothers could walk in and buy a product called Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, specifically designed to quiet teething babies. The active ingredient was morphine sulfate. The baby would stop crying immediately and sleep for a very long time, and everyone assumed the syrup was simply very effective. Pharmacists stocked it cheerfully next to the candy. It was advertised in women's magazines as a must-have product for any responsible and caring American mother. 13. During the 1898 war with Spain, more American soldiers died from eating the meat in their rations than from actual enemy combat. Butchers had been soaking rotten beef in formaldehyde to make it smell acceptable and then selling it directly to the U.S. military. Officers complained. Soldiers got sick by the thousands. The practice was so widespread, it got its own nickname, embalmed beef, and a formal congressional investigation followed that revealed the U.S. Army had been feeding its own troops preserved corpses disguised as dinner. 14. In the 1920s, actual licensed doctors were recommending that Americans add radium to their food and drinking water as a daily health supplement. Radium was put into chocolate, butter, and bottled water and marketed as an energizing tonic that promoted vitality. Wealthy Americans paid premium prices for radium-infused products and bragged about their wellness routines. Customers who consumed it regularly began glowing faintly and then losing their jawbones and then dying, at which point the medical community quietly stopped recommending radium as a breakfast addition. 15. The FBI has officially stated that Italian olive oil fraud is a larger criminal operation inside the United States than heroin distribution. Olive oil is one of the most counterfeited foods on the planet, and most bottles labeled extra virgin Italian on American grocery store shelves contain cheaper oils that have been colored and flavored to pass inspection. Organized crime families have been running fake olive oil networks for decades. Americans drizzle it over their salads feeling very sophisticated while federal agents file paperwork about an international oil conspiracy. 16. A company called Griffin Remedy sold a product throughout the early 1900s called Fat Off, a weight loss candy marketed heavily to American women through magazine advertisements featuring slim illustrated figures. The active ingredient was desiccated thyroid gland harvested from livestock. Women ate thyroid tissue daily, believing they were taking a sophisticated scientific supplement. Their metabolisms accelerated dramatically, their hearts raced, some lost dangerous amounts of weight, and the product was celebrated as a breakthrough until doctors began connecting the symptoms to the ingredient. Nobody had bothered to test on humans before selling it nationally. 17. The USDA beef grading system that tells Americans whether their steak is prime, choice, or select was not designed by independent nutritional scientists or consumer protection agencies. It was created entirely by the beef industry lobby to serve the beef industry's own marketing needs. The grades were written by the people selling the beef, approved by the government, and then presented to American consumers as an objective quality standard. Every steakhouse in the country uses this system as though it came from a neutral authority, which it absolutely did not. 18. Grocery stores charge food companies tens of millions of dollars every year for the right to place their products at the exact height where a child's eyes land when walking down the aisle. This is called a slotting fee, and it is completely legal and completely unregulated. The most aggressively marketed sugary products end up at child eye level not by accident, but because corporations paid specifically for that placement. Parents pushing carts through the cereal aisle are navigating a system that was architecturally designed to make their children scream for specific boxes. 19. American strawberries are legally fumigated with methyl bromide, a chemical so destructive to the ozone layer that it has been banned for nearly every other purpose on Earth under international environmental agreements. Virtually every other use of this pesticide is prohibited globally. Growing strawberries is the exception the United States carved out specifically. Other countries looked at the same chemical and banned it entirely. American strawberry farmers spray it onto the ground before planting, and American consumers buy the fruit and nobody mentions what went into the soil first. 20. A University of Florida doctor invented Gatorade in 1965, specifically to help the Florida Gators football team survive playing in brutal heat. The university funded the research, provided the lab, and employed the scientists. When the drink became a billion-dollar global product, the university that built it received exactly $0 in royalties because they had signed away all rights before anyone understood what they had created. The Gators got a sports drink named after them, and the university got a very expensive lesson in contract law. 21. There is a secretion that comes from beaver anal glands called castoreum, and the FDA has approved it as a natural flavoring that shows up in American vanilla ice cream, candy, and yogurt. Food companies are not required to call it beaver gland juice on the label. They are allowed to write natural flavors in small print and move on with their day. Americans have been eating this ingredient for decades while feeling very good about choosing the natural option over the artificial one at the grocery store. 22. In January of 1919, a massive steel tank holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses exploded without warning in the middle of Boston. A 25-foot wall of boiling molasses came roaring through the streets at 35 miles per hour, swallowing buildings, horses, and people whole. 21 people died and 150 were injured. Witnesses said they could hear the city of Boston smelling like a pancake breakfast for weeks afterward. It remains one of the strangest industrial disasters in American history. 23. The FDA has a published legal document that tells Americans exactly how many insects are allowed inside their food before the government considers it a problem. 60 aphids per 100 grams of frozen broccoli is completely acceptable. 450 insect fragments per 225 grams of wheat flour is within legal limits. These are not emergency thresholds. These are the normal everyday standards sitting inside the bag of flour in the average American kitchen right now, while the label says nothing about any of this. 24. In 1985, an Austrian wine manufacturer decided his product needed to taste sweeter and chose to add diethylene glycol to improve the flavor. Diethylene glycol is antifreeze. He added antifreeze to wine, bottled it, and shipped it across Europe. Hundreds of people were poisoned and at least 2 died before investigators figured out what was in the bottles. Austrian wine exports collapsed completely overnight. The entire country's wine industry was destroyed by one man who looked at antifreeze and decided it seemed like a reasonable ingredient choice. 25. Imitation crab meat fills seafood displays across American supermarkets, and most shoppers assume it is a budget version of real crab. It contains no crab whatsoever. It is made from pulverized Alaskan pollock fish mixed with starch, flavoring, and red food dye pressed into a crab-shaped log. The word imitation does appear on the packaging in lettering, specifically chosen to be difficult to read from a normal standing distance. Americans pile it onto sushi platters at parties and describe the flavor as surprisingly authentic to their guests. 26. American school cafeterias in the 1950s and 60s served a product called Type A lunch that the USDA designed and funded to meet specific nutritional requirements for growing children. Investigators examining the program decades later found that commodity ingredients supplied by agricultural lobbies, including processed cheese, canned meat, and refined grain products, dominated the menus not because they were the most nutritious options available, but because surplus agricultural commodities needed a guaranteed government-funded buyer. American children were the captive market that absorbed whatever the farm surplus system needed to move that season. 27. In 2011, the United States Congress voted to classify pizza as a vegetable in school lunch programs. The decision was based on the fact that 2 tablespoons of tomato paste on a school cafeteria pizza technically meets the USDA's minimum requirement for a vegetable serving. Nutritionists and pediatricians responded with public outrage. Parents wrote angry letters. School lunch advocates held press conferences. Congress reviewed all of this feedback carefully and kept pizza classified as a vegetable anyway because the frozen food lobby had already won the more important meeting. 28. KFC did not arrive at the phrase finger lickin'. Goodbye accident or inspiration. The slogan went through 3 full years of focus group testing before the company officially adopted it. And it was deliberately chosen because food psychologists identified it as the specific combination of words most likely to trigger a guilt and pleasure response simultaneously in American consumers. The goal was to make customers feel slightly embarrassed about enjoying themselves while being unable to stop. It worked so completely that the phrase became one of the most recognized advertising slogans in the history of American fast food. 29. Procter & Gamble found themselves in the 1880s sitting on enormous quantities of cottonseed oil, a waste byproduct from the textile industry that had no obvious use. Their solution was to package it in tins, name it Cottolene, and sell it to American housewives as a revolutionary new cooking fat. Nobody was told it came from textile manufacturing leftovers. The marketing positioned it as a wholesome modern alternative to lard, and it sold successfully. American kitchens absorbed an industrial byproduct and called it an upgrade simply because the packaging looked clean, and the company said so. 30. The original Doritos did not begin in a factory or a test kitchen. They began on a restaurant floor at Disneyland in the 1960s where leftover tortilla chips that had been swept up were repurposed and sold at a small Mexican restaurant inside the park. A Frito-Lay executive tasted them, recognized something commercially interesting in the concept, and brought the idea back to the company. Frito-Lay then developed it into one of the best-selling snack products in American history. The entire Doritos empire started with someone deciding that floor chips were worth something. 31. Azotocarbonamide is a chemical compound used in the manufacturing of yoga mats and shoe soles to make the rubber foamy and flexible. It is also a completely legal bread dough conditioner used across the American baking industry to make sandwich bread softer and faster to produce. Europe looked at the same chemical and banned it from food entirely. Australia did the same. The United States reviewed the evidence, decided the yoga mat chemical was fine in sandwiches at trace levels, and American bread has contained it ever since without any mention on the front of the package. 32. In 1858, a candy maker in Sheffield, England hired an assistant to collect a white powder from the pharmacy to use in his lozenges. The assistant came back with arsenic instead of the intended ingredient because the labels were unclear and both powders looked identical. The candy maker mixed the arsenic into 20 pounds of lozenges and sold them at the local market. 20 people died and 200 more were seriously poisoned before anyone identified the source. That single incident of mislabeled pharmacy powder directly triggered Britain's first national food safety legislation. 33. In 1951, a baker in the small French village of Pont-Saint-Esprit used grain that had been contaminated with ergot fungus and baked it into the community's bread supply without knowing anything was wrong. Within days, 500 villagers began experiencing violent hallucinations. People saw their rooms on fire. Some jumped from windows. Others ran through the streets convinced they were being chased by serpents. The episode lasted weeks, and several people died. The entire village lost its mind simultaneously because of one batch of contaminated flour that nobody thought to inspect before baking. 34. Starting in 1932, a Japanese chemical company called Chiso Corporation was dumping methylmercury waste directly into Minamata Bay in Japan. and local fishing communities ate the fish from that bay every single day. People began losing the ability to walk. Their hands shook uncontrollably. They went deaf. Cats in the village began convulsing and throwing themselves into the sea. Children were born with severe neurological damage. The company knew what it was doing and continued for decades. The Japanese government did not publicly acknowledge the disaster for 24 years after the poisoning began. 35. A significant portion of Parmesan cheese sold across American grocery stores contains cellulose as a filler ingredient. Cellulose is wood pulp. An FDA investigation found that up to 70% of pre-grated Parmesan in the U.S. does not meet the Italian legal standard for real Parmigiano Reggiano. Some brands tested contained so much wood pulp filler that they technically had no qualifying cheese content at all. Americans were shaking what they believed was Italian cheese over their pasta, while the product inside the green canister was closer to a sawdust and dairy powder mixture than anything made in Italy. 36. In 27 American states, it is completely legal to feed pigs, restaurant and cafeteria waste collected from garbage bins, a practice the agriculture industry calls garbage feeding. This waste regularly includes meat scraps and byproducts from other pigs, meaning pigs in those states are being fed other pigs without any specific regulation preventing it. Disease transmission through this practice is a documented concern that researchers have raised for decades. State agriculture departments in those 27 states reviewed the concern and decided that feeding pigs their own species through restaurant garbage was an acceptable and continuing part of American food production. 37. In the 1960s, the American sugar industry was facing growing scientific research linking sugar consumption to heart disease. Their response was to identify prominent Harvard scientists and pay them $50,000 to publish studies arguing that dietary fat was the real cause of heart disease while clearing sugar of any responsibility. The scientists published the research in prestigious journals without disclosing the payments. American nutrition policy shifted dramatically away from sugar regulation for the next 50 years, based largely on studies that had been quietly purchased by the industry. Those studies were designed to protect. 38. Grocery store chains pump synthetic artificial scent through their ventilation systems near the bakery section to make the entire area smell like fresh baking bread, even when no bread is actually being baked at that moment. The scent is manufactured in a lab, piped through the HVAC system, and released at specific times throughout the day to trigger hunger responses in shoppers walking nearby. Supermarkets have known for decades that hungry shoppers spend significantly more money. The smell of bread that contains no bread is a deliberate engineering decision made by people who studied exactly how human hunger works. 39. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, American apple growers sprayed a pesticide called alar on their crops, and the EPA had internal documents indicating it was a probable human carcinogen for nearly a decade before taking any public action. The agency reviewed the data, held internal discussions, and continued allowing alar on American apples, while families packed those apples into children's school lunches every day. The pesticide was finally pulled from the American market in 1989, roughly 10 years after the EPA's own scientists had already expressed serious concerns about what it was doing inside the human body. 40. Twinkies have a reputation in American culture as an almost supernatural processed food, containing mysterious artificial ingredients engineered to last forever. The reality is stranger than the myth. The golden sponge cake contains no butter and no milk. The white filling that Americans assume is some form of cream contains zero dairy ingredients and is made entirely from vegetable shortening and corn syrup pressed into a cream-shaped form. Hostess built one of the most iconic American snack foods out of ingredients that have no relationship to the dessert experience they are imitating, and it became a national treasure anyway. 41. Titanium dioxide is a white chemical compound used industrially in sunscreen, house paint, and wall primer to create bright white color. It is also a completely legal food additive in the United States used to whiten candies, chewing gum, and salad dressings, listed on ingredient labels simply as artificial color. European food regulators reviewed the available safety research in 2021 and suspended its authorization across the EU over concerns about potential DNA damage. American regulators reviewed the same body of research and decided titanium dioxide was still acceptable inside the gum. Americans chew every single day. 42. During World War II, the U.S. military needed to add iron to soldiers' field rations to prevent nutritional deficiency, but synthetic iron supplements had not yet been developed at the scale required. Their solution was to grind actual iron metal into fine filings small enough to pass through the human digestive system without causing internal damage, and mix those metal filings directly into the food. Soldiers ate meals that literally contained ground metal, and the military classified this as a nutritional intervention. The filings were fine enough that the body absorbed some iron content and passed the rest completely unaware. 43. PFAS chemicals are a class of synthetic compounds used in non-stick cookware coatings and food packaging materials, and they do not break down inside the human body or in the environment, which is why scientists call them forever chemicals. Researchers testing American blood samples found PFAS present in 97% of people tested, including newborn infants who had never eaten processed food or used non-stick pans. The chemicals transfer through the placenta during pregnancy. Babies are arriving in the world already carrying industrial chemical compounds in their bloodstream, before they have taken their first breath or eaten their first meal. 44. In 1858, American candy manufacturers were using lead chromate as a yellow food dye and copper arsenite as a green food dye in penny sweets sold directly to children at corner stores. Both compounds are confirmed poisons with no safe consumption level. Children bought these candies with their own small coins and ate them in the street while manufacturers recorded their sales figures and ordered more raw materials. No government agency was requiring safety testing on food colorings at this time, and no manufacturer was volunteering to stop using the cheapest available pigments, regardless of what those pigments were made from. 45. Wagyu beef has become one of the most premium and expensive menu items in American steakhouses, with some cuts selling for hundreds of dollars per plate based on the promise of authentic Japanese breeding and extraordinary marbling. Independent laboratory testing of dishes labeled A5 Wagyu at American restaurants found that over 80% of the samples contained cheaper crossbred beef or non-Wagyu cattle entirely. The beef that arrived at the table looking beautifully marbled and priced like a luxury experience was, in most tested cases, a completely different animal than the one printed on the menu. 46. American restaurant menus use specific language patterns that food psychologists have identified as reliably increasing the perceived value and willingness to pay for dishes. Words like handcrafted, artisanal, locally sourced, and slow-roasted trigger measurable. Increases in how much a customer expects to pay and how satisfied they report feeling after eating. Cornell University researchers found that descriptive menu language alone increased sales of the same dish by 27% with no change to the actual food. The dish on the plate is identical. The words wrapped around it on the menu are an engineered psychological experience that the diner is paying a premium to have. 47. The FDA operates a designation called Generally Recognized as Safe, which allows food companies to evaluate their own new additives internally, declare them safe based on their own assessment, and add them to American food products without submitting any supporting data to the FDA for independent review. The food company conducts its own safety evaluation, reaches its own conclusion, and proceeds without external oversight. An independent investigation found that flavor companies, ingredient manufacturers, and food corporations had approved hundreds of their own additives through this system using panels of scientists who were employed by or financially connected to the same companies seeking approval. 48. The serving sizes printed on American food packaging were not determined by nutritionists calculating appropriate portion sizes for human health. They were set by manufacturers who understood that smaller serving sizes would make the calorie counts on the nutrition label appear lower and more acceptable to health-conscious shoppers. A single standard bag of chips lists its nutrition information as applying to 2.5 servings. A bottle of soda contains 2.5 servings according to its own label. Americans reading those labels and assuming they describe the whole container they are holding are doing math that was designed to be done incorrectly. 49. The United States applies more atrazine herbicide to its farmland annually than any other country on Earth. Atrazine is a weed killer that runs off into rivers, streams, and groundwater supplies across the American Midwest. University researchers studying the effects of atrazine on wildlife found that male frogs exposed to atrazine concentrations at levels commonly found in American tap water were chemically feminized, losing reproductive function entirely. The EPA reviewed this research and continued permitting atrazine use. European regulators reviewed the same research and banned atrazine completely, a decision they made in 2004 while American tap water continued carrying it downstream. 50. Procter & Gamble's lawyers faced a tax problem in the United Kingdom, where Pringles were subject to a luxury potato chip tax that would significantly increase the product's price for British consumers. Their legal solution was to argue in British court that Pringles should not be classified as potato chips at all because the product was only 42% potato by content. The can had originally been patented using tennis ball container language for manufacturing reasons. The lawyers combined these facts and successfully convinced a court that Pringles were not chips, avoided the tax, and established that the product existed in its own legal and taxonomic category. 51. Carmine is a red dye used in red Skittles, strawberry yogurt, and certain Starbucks pink drinks, and it is made by collecting dried cochineal beetles, boiling them, and processing the liquid into a concentrated pigment. It takes approximately 70,000 individual beetles to produce 1 pound of red dye. The FDA requires this ingredient to be listed on labels by name following a ruling in 2009. But for decades before that, it appeared only under the term natural color. Americans eating red candy were consuming boiled beetles, and the packaging was designed to make that fact as invisible as possible. 52. In 1906, a congressional investigation into the American meatpacking industry revealed that USDA inspectors stationed inside Chicago slaughterhouses had been accepting bribes from the same meatpacking companies they were assigned to regulate. Inspectors were stamping condemned animal carcasses as passed and approved in exchange for payments from plant managers. 5 inspectors were identified, investigated, and fired from their positions. The bribery system that had allowed diseased meat to enter the American food supply was publicly exposed. 5 people lost their jobs, and the structural arrangement that made the bribery possible was left largely intact and continued operating. 53. Southern American farmland was soaked in arsenic-based pesticides for decades during the era of cotton farming, and that arsenic absorbed into the soil did not disappear when farmers switched crops. American rice grown in southern states pulls arsenic directly out of that contaminated soil through its root system as it grows. The FDA has issued specific guidance warning parents against feeding rice cereal to infants as a first food because of measurable arsenic levels found in tested products. Rice cereal has been the standard American infant first food recommendation for generations, and the arsenic contamination exists across both conventional and organic brands. 54. In January of 1993, hundreds of people across the American Pacific Northwest became seriously ill after eating undercooked hamburgers from Jack in the Box restaurants, and the outbreak was eventually traced to E. coli contamination in the beef supply. Investigators discovered during the inquiry that health inspectors had already flagged the meat supplier being used by 73 Jack in the Box locations before the outbreak began. The supplier had known issues on record. Jack in the Box had the supplier on contract. The contaminated beef went into the patties went to customers, and 4 children died. 55. Independent seafood testing organizations have found that up to 1/3 of all seafood sold in American grocery stores and restaurants is mislabeled, meaning the fish in the package or on the plate is a different and cheaper species than what the label or menu claims. Red snapper is the single most commonly faked fish in the United States, substituted so frequently that some testing has found the majority of fish sold as red snapper contains entirely different species. Americans ordering what they believe is a specific fish are in many cases eating whatever cheaper alternative was available that week at the supplier. 56. American grocery stores deliberately lower the temperature in the produce section several degrees below, What is necessary to keep vegetables fresh? Because consumer research found that shoppers associate cold air with freshness and buy more produce in cooler environments. The vegetables do not require the extra chill. The customers do. Misting systems spray water onto produce displays on timed cycles, not to keep the vegetables hydrated, but because research showed wet vegetables looked fresher to shoppers than dry ones. Increasing purchase rates regardless of the actual moisture content, the vegetable needed to maintain quality. 57. The phrase, "the other white meat," was one of the most successful advertising slogans in American food marketing history, running for over 2 decades and successfully repositioning pork as a healthy, lean protein alternative to chicken in the minds of American consumers. The National Pork Board eventually paid $3 million to officially retire the slogan in 2011. Every dollar of that $3 million came from a mandatory tax collected from American pork farmers by the USDA on every animal sold. Farmers who may have disagreed with the decision had already paid for it through a government-administered levy. They had no choice but to accept. 58. McDonald's employs food scientists whose specific job is to calculate the precise ratio of salt, sugar, and fat in menu items to hit what researchers call the bliss point, the exact combination of those 3 ingredients at which the human brain's natural signal telling a person they have eaten enough is effectively overridden. When a person eats past fullness at McDonald's, it is not a personal failure of willpower. It is the documented intended outcome of an engineering process conducted by credentialed scientists in a laboratory setting who were hired specifically to make stopping feel harder than continuing to eat. 59. For 70 years, American raisin farmers operated under a Depression-era USDA program that required them to hand over a percentage of their crop to the government every season for free, with no compensation, as a mechanism for controlling raisin supply and keeping market prices stable. In some years, the mandatory surrender reached 47% of a farmer's entire harvest. Marvin Horn, a California raisin farmer, refused to comply and fought the program through the American court system for years. The Supreme Court ruled the program unconstitutional in 2015, 70 years after raisin farmers had begun surrendering nearly half their crop annually. 60. Diet Pepsi launched in the early 1960s using cyclamate as its artificial sweetener, and the product built a loyal consumer base among Americans seeking a lower-calorie cola option. In 1969, the FDA banned cyclamate, after studies showed it caused bladder cancer in rats at high doses. Pepsi received the news and reformulated the entire product essentially overnight, replacing cyclamate before the ban took full effect. The speed of the reformulation suggested the company had been monitoring the regulatory situation closely enough to have a backup formula ready before the government finished making its final decision. 61. Propylene glycol is a chemical compound used in aircraft de-icing fluid to prevent ice from forming on wings during winter flight operations. It is also a fully legal food additive in the United States, where it functions as a moisture carrier in packaged baked goods, salad dressings, and flavoring systems. The FDA classifies it as generally recognized as safe. European regulators have placed stricter limitations on its use in food products. American consumers eating packaged muffins or bottled dressings are ingesting a compound that airport ground crews spray on airplane wings before takeoff, and the label is not required to explain that connection. 62. Listerine was invented as a surgical antiseptic and later repositioned as a mouthwash. But in the 1930s and 40s, the company ran an extended marketing campaign to push the brand into an entirely different category. Listerine placed advertisements in cooking and homemaking magazines featuring actual recipes that called for Listerine as an ingredient, positioning the mouthwash as a useful product in the kitchen. The campaign was designed to expand consumer usage beyond dental care into daily cooking routines. Food editors at the time published these advertisements alongside genuine recipes, without noting any distinction between the mouthwash and actual food ingredients. 63. In 2008, Chinese dairy producers discovered they could artificially inflate the measured protein content of watered-down milk by adding melamine, a chemical compound used in the manufacturing of plastic flooring and kitchen surfaces. Melamine mimics protein in standard industry testing. Producers added it to infant formula and shipped the product across China. 6 infants died, and 300,000 babies became seriously ill, many developing kidney stones from melamine crystallizing inside their bodies. The scandal implicated multiple major Chinese dairy brands and revealed that the adulteration had been occurring at scale for an extended period, before any testing caught it. 64. In 1981, Spanish authorities began receiving reports of a mysterious illness spreading through working-class communities that caused severe respiratory failure, nerve damage, and organ deterioration. Investigators eventually traced the source to cooking oil being sold cheaply at informal markets. Industrial rapeseed oil that had been chemically denatured with aniline for use as machine fuel had been fraudulently refined, repackaged, and sold as edible cooking oil to families who could not afford grocery store prices. 800 people died, and 20,000 were left with permanent disabilities. The perpetrators had knowingly sold industrial fuel solvent as food to save money on production costs. 65. Honey is the third most counterfeited food product on Earth, and the United States imports millions of pounds of it annually from suppliers whose product laboratory testing has repeatedly found to be ultra-filtered, meaning all pollen has been removed. Pollen removal is the primary method used to hide a product's geographic origin and conceal illegal Chinese honey that would otherwise be subject to import tariffs. Honey with no pollen cannot be traced to any country of origin. Americans buying jars labeled pure natural honey are in many cases purchasing a filtered syrup product with no botanical origin that can be legally verified. 66. A synthetic hormone implant called Zeranol has been used in American beef cattle since its FDA approval in 1969 to accelerate weight gain and reduce the time and feed cost required to bring an animal to slaughter weight. Zeranol mimics estrogen inside the animal's body. The European Union banned American beef treated with growth hormones in 1989, citing cancer risk concerns, and has maintained that ban for over 35 years despite repeated World Trade Organization rulings against it. Americans have been eating hormone-implanted beef for over 50 years, while their primary trading partner refuses to import it. 67. Egg cartons labeled cage-free suggest to most American shoppers that the hens producing those eggs are living in open conditions with meaningful space and freedom of movement. The legal definition of cage-free requires only that hens are not kept in individual wire battery cages. It says nothing about outdoor access, space per bird, natural light, or ability to engage in basic natural behaviors. Thousands of hens can be packed into a single windowless industrial shed, and the eggs they produce qualify completely for cage-free labeling. The label communicates a living situation that the legal standard does not actually require. 68. Food industry researchers studying the relationship between color and consumer appetite discovered decades ago that the color yellow triggers hunger responses in humans more reliably than any other color in the visible spectrum. This finding was incorporated into the branding strategies of the largest fast food companies in America. McDonald's uses yellow as its signature arch color. Subway uses yellow prominently across its signage. Denny's and IHOP built their entire visual identities around yellow. Every one of these companies arrived at the same color not by coincidence or aesthetic preference, but because the same body of appetite psychology research pointed them all in the same direction. 69. American supermarket tomatoes are bred and harvested according to a system optimized entirely for shelf life and visual appearance rather than flavor. Tomatoes are picked while still green and hard enough to survive mechanical harvesting and long-distance shipping without bruising, then exposed to ethylene gas in storage facilities to trigger the chemical process that turns them red before they reach the store. The flavor compounds that make a tomato taste like a tomato and the red color pigment develop simultaneously on the vine, meaning a tomato ripened artificially. After picking cannot develop full flavor regardless of how red it appears sitting in the produce section. 70. Richard Montañez has told the story publicly for years of being a janitor at a Frito-Lay plant in California who invented Flamin' Hot Cheetos by experimenting with chili powder at home. Then cold, calling the CEO and pitching the idea directly, launching one of the most successful snack products in American history from a position of having no authority or budget whatsoever. Frito-Lay has since disputed this account entirely, stating internally that the product was developed by their own product development team, and that Montañas had no role in its creation. Both versions of the story cannot be true, and the company that owns the product controls which version gets told. 71. Tertiary butyl hydroquinone is a petroleum-derived antioxidant added to fast food frying oils and packaged crackers to extend shelf life, and it is fully legal in American food at trace concentrations. Toxicology data shows that 5 grams of this compound is lethal to a human being. The FDA permits it in food at levels calculated to stay below that threshold. Food scientists at major American corporations know the precise distance between the amount in a serving of crackers and the amount that causes death, and they formulate their products to stay on the correct side of that line. 72. Margarine was legalized in the United States in 1884, after years of intense lobbying from the dairy industry trying to keep it off the market entirely. 2 years after legalization, the first American margarine manufacturing facility was burned completely to the ground in a fire that investigators and contemporary observers widely attributed to arson connected to dairy industry interests. The dairy lobby had spent years fighting margarine through legislation, through taxation, and through campaigns to have it colored pink so consumers would find it unappetizing. When legal methods failed to stop the factory from opening, the factory stopped existing by other means. 73. Hooker Chemical Company purchased a piece of land near Niagara Falls in New York called Love Canal and used it throughout the 1940s and 50s to bury 21,000 tons of toxic chemical waste before selling the land to the local school board for $1. A school was built directly on top of the buried chemicals. A residential neighborhood developed around it. In 1979, residents began noticing strange odors, unusual illnesses, and substances seeping through basement walls and surfacing in backyards. Children in the neighborhood were developing rare cancers at rates that alarmed state health investigators, who eventually ordered a full evacuation. 74. During the 1950s, the United States military was conducting above-ground nuclear weapons tests at sites in Nevada, and using those tests as opportunities to study the effects of radiation exposure on soldiers stationed nearby. In 1955, military researchers fed irradiated food to soldiers at these test sites as part of a study examining whether radiation-exposed meals caused measurable harm to the humans consuming them. The soldiers were not told they were research subjects in a study about irradiated food. They were told they were eating field rations. The distinction between those two things was not considered relevant information for the soldiers to have. 75. Grade A, printed on an egg carton in large letters across American grocery store displays, communicates quality and freshness to shoppers in a way that influences purchasing decisions daily. The grade refers exclusively to the physical appearance of the eggshell and has no relationship to the age of the egg inside. Eggs can be legally sold with grade A on the label for up to 45 days after the hen laid them. An egg purchased on any given day at an American grocery store could have been laid 6 weeks earlier and still carry the highest quality designation the labeling system offers. 76. In 1903, the U.S. Patent Office granted a patent to a Pennsylvania company for a device described as a grape juice concentrator that was actually designed to produce wine while technically remaining compliant with local temperance laws. Inventors filed patents throughout the temperance era using deliberately misleading descriptions to protect alcohol production equipment from legal challenge. The Patent Office approved these applications because examiners reviewed the technical claims of the device rather than its obvious intended purpose. America's most morally contested beverage of the era was being manufactured using federally patented equipment that described itself as something else entirely. 77. The FDA approved Olestra in 1996 as a fat substitute for use in snack foods after a review process that included data showing the compound caused gastrointestinal side effects in consumers. Olestra interferes with fat absorption in the digestive system, which causes the unabsorbed fat to exit the body in a process the FDA's own required warning label described using the phrase anal leakage. The agency approved the ingredient anyway and required only that chip bags carry a small warning label explaining this outcome. Frito-Lay launched Wow chips containing olestra, Americans bought them, experienced the documented side effects, and the product was eventually discontinued. 78. Before the 1890s, Americans did not eat breakfast cereal, and the concept of breakfast food as a distinct category of product did not exist in American consumer culture. People ate whatever was available in the morning, typically leftovers, bread, or whatever the household had on hand. John Harvey Kellogg and his brother, along with C.W. Post, invented the breakfast food category from scratch as a marketing construct designed to sell a new type of processed grain product to American households. They created the need, named the meal occasion, built the category around their products, and trained an entire nation to believe that cereal belonged specifically at breakfast. 79. American corn has been selectively bred over decades with yield, drought resistance, and ethanol production efficiency as the primary optimization targets, and the nutritional profile of that corn has shifted significantly as a result. USDA nutrient database comparisons between corn varieties grown in the 1950s and modern commercial varieties show that contemporary American corn contains approximately 50% less protein than the corn Americans were eating 70 years ago. The corn being processed into food products, animal feed, and high-fructose corn syrup across the American food supply today is nutritionally a substantially different plant than the crop it replaced. 80. 5-Hour Energy launched in the American market with a formula containing niacin at concentrations high enough to trigger a physiological response called niacin flush, a sensation of warmth, tingling, and visible redness spreading across the skin that typically begins within 15 to 30 minutes of consumption. Consumers experiencing this reaction interpreted the physical sensation as evidence that the product was actively working inside their body and delivering the energy boost it promised. The tingling was real. The connection between that tingling and any actual energy benefit was not supported by the sensation itself. The feeling of something happening was the product's most effective marketing tool. 81. Sodium nitrite is added to hot dogs, bacon, and cured deli meats across the American food supply as a preservative that prevents the growth of botulism bacteria, which causes one of the most lethal forms of food poisoning known to medicine. When sodium nitrite interacts with amino acids during digestion, it forms compounds called nitrosamines, which the World Health Organization classifies as Group 1 carcinogens, meaning confirmed causes of cancer in humans. The USDA mandates sodium nitrite use in cured meats to prevent botulism. Americans are therefore eating a confirmed carcinogen because the alternative is a paralytic toxin, and regulators decided that was the better of the two available options. 82. Graham crackers were invented in 1829 by Sylvester Graham, a Presbyterian minister from New Jersey who had developed an elaborate theory that bland, unsweetened, minimally processed food would eliminate sinful thoughts and physical urges from the American population. Graham believed that spicy and flavorful food directly stimulated carnal desire, and that a diet of plain crackers would produce calmer, more morally disciplined citizens. He lectured across America to large audiences about the spiritual dangers of tasty food. The cracker named after him eventually got coated in chocolate and marshmallow and turned into a campfire dessert, which Graham would have considered a catastrophic failure of his entire philosophy. 83. In 2019, the FDA conducted testing that found benzene, a chemical classified as a known cause of leukemia in humans, contaminating 78 different sunscreen products sold across American stores. A follow-up investigation published in 2022 found the same carcinogen present in dozens of American soft drink brands at measurable concentrations. Benzene forms inside carbonated beverages when certain preservatives react with vitamin C under specific storage conditions. The drinks had been on American store shelves for years. The preservatives and the vitamin C had been there together the entire time, and the chemistry between them had been producing benzene without anyone testing for it. 84. FD and C yellow. Number 5, known as tartrazine, colors Mountain Dew, boxed macaroni and cheese, potato chips, and dozens of other American food products that bright artificial yellow. A study published in 2007 by researchers at Southampton University found that tartrazine and certain other artificial food dyes caused measurable increases in hyperactive behavior in children who consumed them. The European Union responded by requiring warning labels on any food containing these dyes. The United States reviewed the same research and determined that no warning label was necessary, meaning American children continue consuming tartrazine daily with no label indicating any potential behavioral effect whatsoever. 85. Truffle oil appears on menus at American restaurants as a premium ingredient suggesting the presence of actual truffles, one of the most expensive and rare food ingredients on Earth. The overwhelming majority of truffle oil sold in American grocery stores and used in American restaurant kitchens contains no truffle whatsoever. It is flavored entirely with a synthetic petroleum-derived chemical compound called 2,4-dithiapentane that mimics one component of truffle aroma. No regulation requires the label to disclose that the oil contains no actual truffle. Chefs drizzle it over dishes and charge accordingly, while the ingredient itself has the same relationship to a real truffle as a car air freshener has to an actual pine forest. 86. Commercial turkeys raised for the American Thanksgiving market have been selectively bred over decades to produce such an extreme proportion of breast meat relative to body size that the birds have become physically incapable of reproducing without human assistance. The breast muscles are so large and the body proportions so distorted that natural mating is biomechanically impossible for the animal. Every single turkey consumed at an American Thanksgiving table was conceived through artificial insemination performed by farm workers. The bird Americans associate most strongly with tradition, family gathering, and natural abundance is an animal that cannot exist for a single generation without direct human reproductive intervention. 87. American vending machines were introduced into workplace environments throughout the 1950s and 60s with the stated purpose of improving worker productivity by reducing the time employees spent leaving facilities for food breaks. Coca-Cola and Pepsi funded studies through industry groups showing productivity benefits from on-site vending access. Factory owners installed the machines believing they were investing in efficiency. Researchers examining purchasing data decades later found that workplace vending machine placement increased daily sugar consumption among workers by amounts that corresponded directly to documented increases in afternoon energy crashes, which then increased coffee consumption, which the same companies also supplied through the same vending contracts. 88. Food companies discovered through consumer behavior research that placing the words low-fat or natural anywhere on product packaging causes consumers to eat approximately 30% more of that product per sitting compared to identical products without those words. The effect works even when consumers are told about it in advance. Knowing that a label saying low-fat causes overeating does not prevent the overeating from occurring when a person is actually holding the bag. Food manufacturers understand this dynamic completely. Products with health-adjacent language on the front of the package are deliberately formulated and labeled to trigger a behavioral response that benefits the company's sales volume. 89. Aspartame was first submitted to the FDA for approval in the 1970s, and an internal FDA scientist reviewing the application raised serious concerns that the brain tumor data included in the submission had been manipulated to produce favorable results. The FDA revoked the approval based on these concerns. The case sat unresolved for several years until the Reagan administration replaced the FDA commissioner in 1981, after which the new leadership approved aspartame, and it entered the American food supply. Aspartame is now one of the most widely consumed artificial sweeteners on Earth, and the circumstances of its regulatory approval have been debated by scientists and consumer advocates for over 4 decades. 90. Red Bull is marketed across America as an Austrian product, presented through its branding and origin story as a European innovation that transformed the global energy drink category. The actual origin is a Thai working-class energy drink called Krating Dang that had been sold cheaply to laborers and truck drivers in Thailand for years before an Austrian businessman named Dietrich Mateschitz discovered it during a business trip, paid for the rights, carbonated the formula, redesigned the packaging, tripled the price, and repositioned the entire product as a Western lifestyle brand for young professionals and extreme sports enthusiasts. The Austrian connection is the marketing. The product itself came from a Thai factory floor. 91. Carrageenan is a thickening agent derived from red seaweed that appears in organic dairy products including milk, yogurt, and infant formula sold across American stores under certified organic labeling. Animal studies examining carrageenan's effects on digestive tissue found associations with intestinal inflammation and colon tumor development in the test subjects. Consumer advocacy groups petitioned to have carrageenan removed from the approved ingredients list for certified organic products based on this research. The National Organic Standards Board voted to remove it. The USDA overruled that decision, and carrageenan remained legal in certified organic American food, meaning the organic label does not indicate its absence. 92. In 1900, Heinz ketchup was one product competing in a crowded American condiment market where most manufacturers use sodium benzoate as a preservative to extend shelf life. Henry Heinz reformulated his ketchup to contain no preservatives at all, not because of any health concern for consumers, but because he recognized that publicly attacking competitors for using toxic preservatives while positioning his own product as pure and natural was a more powerful marketing weapon than any advertisement he could buy. The strategy worked completely. Heinz captured dominant market share. Competitors were damaged by the association with benzoate, and Heinz became the default American ketchup through a calculated public health narrative. 93. American orange juice labeled 100% pure and not from concentrate undergoes a process after squeezing that the industry calls de-aeration, in which all oxygen is removed from the juice before it is stored in massive tanks, sometimes for over a year. Removing oxygen also removes the flavor compounds that make orange juice taste like oranges. Before packaging, flavor companies add back a precisely engineered flavor pack derived from orange byproducts to restore the taste. The flavor pack formula varies by brand, which is why Tropicana tastes different from Simply Orange despite both being labeled 100% pure orange juice with no additives. 94. In 1950, a congressional committee chaired by James Delaney began investigating what had been added to the American food supply since the end of World War II. The investigation found that 704 synthetic chemical compounds had been introduced into American food products during that period, most of them industrial byproducts of wartime manufacturing processes that food companies had identified as cheap functional ingredients. Not one of these 704 chemicals had been tested on humans before being added to food. Americans had spent the post-war years eating an undisclosed quantity of untested industrial chemicals, while the government was still compiling the list of what those chemicals actually were. 95. Philip Morris is the company responsible for Marlboro cigarettes and for decades of research into how nicotine creates dependency and how advertising exploits psychological vulnerability to build compulsive consumer behavior. In 1994, Philip Morris simultaneously owned Kraft Foods, General Foods, and Oscar Mayer, three of the largest American packaged food brands in the country. Internal documents that emerged later showed the company directly applied its addiction research and craving engineering methodology to the formulation of American packaged food products during the years it owned those brands. The scientists who studied how to make cigarettes harder to stop smoking were working in the same corporate building as the people deciding what went into American cheese. 96. Foie gras is produced by inserting a metal feeding tube down the throat of a duck or goose and force-feeding the animal several times daily until the liver swells to approximately 10 times its normal healthy size from the accumulated fat. The resulting enlarged liver is then harvested and sold as a luxury food product in American restaurants at significant cost per serving. California banned the sale of foie gras twice based on animal cruelty grounds and was overruled by federal courts both times on interstate commerce grounds. The product remains legal to sell in most American states and appears on tasting menus at some of the most expensive restaurants in the country. 97. American consumers buying meat labeled natural at the grocery store are operating under an assumption that the product has been minimally processed and contains no added ingredients beyond the meat itself. The USDA permits meat carrying the natural label to have been injected with up to 30% of its total weight in saline solution before packaging. The disclosure is required but appears only in small print on the back of the package as enhanced with up to 30% broth. A chicken breast labeled natural and weighing 1 pound at the point of sale may contain nearly 5 ounces of injected salt water that the consumer is purchasing at the same price per pound as actual chicken. 98. Every major American grocery chain positions its dairy and egg refrigerators at the furthest possible point from the store entrance, typically in the back corner of the building. Store designers and retail behavior researchers confirm this placement is not determined by refrigeration infrastructure or logistical necessity. It is determined by the fact that dairy and eggs are the two most commonly purchased grocery items, and placing them at the back of the store guarantees that every customer who comes in for milk must walk past the maximum possible number of other products before reaching what they came to buy. The entire store layout is architected around the purchasing behavior of the average American shopper. 99. American wheat varieties have been selectively bred since the 1960s with higher gluten content as a target characteristic because elevated gluten makes bread dough more elastic, produces a lighter and fluffier final loaf, and improves the industrial baking process at scale. The structural protein composition of American wheat changed significantly over the following 3 decades as these higher gluten varieties replaced older strains across commercial agriculture. Beginning in the 1990s, rates of diagnosed celiac disease and gluten sensitivity in American patients began rising sharply. Researchers studying the correlation between the timeline of wheat breeding changes and the timeline of gluten disorder. Diagnoses have noted the 30-year gap between the agricultural shift and the medical trend. 100. Spam was created in 1937 by Hormel Foods as a commercial solution to a specific inventory problem. Pork shoulder was the one cut of the pig that American consumers consistently refused to buy in meaningful quantities, and Hormel needed a way to move it through their production system. The answer was to grind it, mix it with salt and sodium nitrite, seal it in a tin, and sell it as a convenient shelf-stable protein. The U.S. military adopted it during World War II because it required no refrigeration and could be shipped globally at low cost. Spam became a cultural institution in Hawaii and parts of Asia, while remaining a punchline in the American mainland that invented it. 101. High fructose corn syrup is processed by the liver differently than regular cane sugar, with research suggesting it converts to liver fat more readily than sucrose and bypasses the hormonal signals that tell the brain a person has consumed enough calories. Americans consume it in quantities that would have been unrecognizable to previous generations because it appears in products that contain no obvious sweetness, including bread, ketchup, salad dressing, and pasta sauce. The federal government simultaneously funds research documenting its metabolic effects and pays billions of dollars annually in corn subsidies that make producing high fructose corn syrup cheaper than using any alternative sweetener. 102. The Oscar Mayer Wienermobile is one of the most recognizable promotional vehicles in American history, but it was not built to sell hot dogs at events or hand out samples to children. It was created in 1936 specifically to generate newspaper coverage in cities that had no television yet, because television did not exist as a mass medium, and brand awareness had to be built through crowd events that journalists would photograph and write about. A giant hot dog-shaped vehicle driving through a city guaranteed a newspaper story. Oscar Mayer got free publicity in every city the Wienermobile visited and paid only for fuel and a driver. 103. A congressional investigation completed in 2021 tested a broad range of commercially available baby foods sold in American stores and found measurable concentrations of lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury in 95% of the products examined. The contamination was present across conventional and organic brands equally, meaning the premium price parents pay for organic baby food did not correspond to lower heavy metal content in the tested samples. The metals enter the food supply through contaminated agricultural soil and certain ingredients like rice and sweet potato that accumulate heavy metals naturally during growth. Regulators had not required heavy metal testing of baby food before the congressional investigation forced the issue into public view. 104. In 1973, a small American canning company called Bon Vivant shipped a batch of vichyssoise soup that had been improperly processed, allowing Clostridium botulinum bacteria to survive inside sealed cans that were sold in American grocery stores. A man in New York opened one of those cans, ate the soup, and died. His wife was left permanently paralyzed. Federal investigators traced the contamination back to the Bon Vivant facility and found catastrophic failures in the company's sterilization procedures. Bon Vivant was shut down immediately, and the FDA used the incident to completely overhaul commercial canning safety standards across the entire American food industry within months. 105. Champagne is a sparkling wine that French law and European trade agreements restrict to wine produced exclusively in the Champagne region of France using specific methods and grape varieties. American wineries in California spent decades legally labeling their sparkling wine as champagne for sale in the United States under a post-World War II trade loophole that exempted American producers from European geographic designation rules. France objected to this arrangement continuously for over 80 years through diplomatic channels, trade negotiations, and international agreements. California's sparkling wine labeled champagne sat on American store shelves for generations, while French trade representatives filed formal complaints that the American government acknowledged and declined to act upon quickly. 106. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving in 1959, the United States Secretary of Agriculture held a press conference to announce that the national cranberry crop had been found contaminated with aminotriazole, a herbicide that animal studies had linked to thyroid cancer. The announcement was made live and carried immediately by television news across the country. Cranberry sales collapsed within days as American families preparing Thanksgiving grocery lists removed cranberries from their plans entirely. It was the first food safety crisis in American history to unfold in real time on national television, and the cranberry industry spent years recovering from a single press conference held 10 days before the country's largest food holiday. 107. Federal milk marketing orders are a regulatory system created during the Depression to stabilize dairy prices by controlling how milk is priced and distributed across different American regions. The system has remained active and largely unchanged for nearly a century despite the economic conditions that created it no longer existing. In certain regions, these orders legally require dairy farmers to sell their milk at prices below what it costs them to produce it. Thousands of small family dairy operations have gone bankrupt under this pricing structure over the past several decades, while the regulatory framework that helped produce those bankruptcies continues operating as written law because the political will to dismantle a Depression-era farm program has never materialized. 108. Fast food chains and consumer food brands run limited-time-only menu promotions on a regular cycle, and the scarcity framing of these offers is entirely manufactured. The McRib, the Shamrock Shake, the Pumpkin Spice Latte, and dozens of similar products are not limited because ingredient supply is genuinely constrained or production is actually difficult. They are limited by deliberate corporate scheduling because consumer behavior research shows that artificial scarcity increases purchase urgency and drives transaction rates up by as much as 40% compared to the same product available year-round. The item is the same. The limitation is a documented psychological manipulation technique applied to a food product. 109. Every banana sold commercially in the United States is a genetically identical clone of a single variety called the Cavendish, meaning there is no genetic diversity anywhere in the entire American banana supply. A soil fungus called tropical race 4 has been spreading through banana-growing regions across Asia, Australia, and Latin America, and it targets Cavendish specifically. Because every commercial banana plant is genetically identical, a pathogen that can infect one plant can infect all of them using exactly the same biological pathway. Scientists have no known cure for tropical race 4. The previous commercial banana variety called the Gros Michel was wiped out by a similar fungus in the 1950s and the Cavendish replaced it. 110. Every bottle of California wine, every glass poured at an American winery, and every grape growing on a commercial American vine is growing on a root system that does not originally belong to the American grape variety producing the fruit above ground. In the 1860s, a tiny louse called phylloxera spread through European vineyards and destroyed virtually the entire French wine industry, along with vineyards across the continent. Researchers discovered that American grape root systems were naturally resistant to phylloxera. Every European and American commercial vineyard subsequently grafted their grape varieties onto American roots, meaning the global wine industry has been growing on American root systems for over 150 years without most wine drinkers knowing this fact. 111. In 2024, scientists published research reporting that microplastic particles had been found embedded inside human arterial plaque for the first time in medical history. The study compared patients whose arterial plaque contained microplastics to patients whose plaque did not, and found that those carrying microplastics in their arteries were 4.5 times more likely to experience a heart attack, a stroke, or death within the following 3 years. The microplastics were traced to plastic food packaging that leaches particles into food and beverages during storage and heating. Americans have been eating, drinking, and breathing microplastics for decades, and the cardiovascular data published in 2024 was the first direct link between those particles and measurable early death. And that is only the beginning of how completely unhinged the history of your food actually is. Every single thing you ate today has a story behind it that somebody very powerful did not want you to know about. If this video made you question everything in your refrigerator right now, hit that like button because you deserve the truth served dumb and loud. Subscribe to Dumb History because we are just getting started, and comment below which fact destroyed you the most. See you in the next one.